Mr Speaker, it's welcome the contribution from the Leader of the Greens, but I must say I disagree with a number of her statements there. Just to use, for example, the housing issue, the government actually is doing a tremendous amount of work on how to make better use of what is actually a $15 billion asset owned by the New Zealand taxpayer. And the government found that all the performance measures that the previous government have been using focused on the houses and not on the people. And actually, if there are 10,000 people on the waiting list, some of them do have quite serious housing need, and we do need to make better use of what is actually the taxpayer's largest single asset. And the member will be able to see that process unfold over the next few months. She also raised the issue of welfare reform. And I think there's a number of aspects of this on which we could agree. There are currently, despite having 10 years or 8 or 9 years of pretty strong economic growth and strong growth in jobs, there are 250,000 New Zealanders currently on so-called long-term benefits. That's sickness, invalids and the DPB benefit. 250,000, 250,000 people. And I have to say the system doesn't pay a great deal of attention to them. Their capacities are unknown, their potential is untested. It is a significant human waste, as the Prime Minister referred to yesterday in his statement. And the Prime Minister signalled in his statement that for the current government, that's not good enough. There is a lot of unrealised potential among those 250,000 people, and there is a very large long-term fiscal cost. And one of the things the government can do to deal with the long-term fiscal issues in New Zealand is to have a pretty hard look at how we deal with that large group of people on long-term benefits. Mr Speaker, these things were covered yesterday by the Prime Minister in his statement, part of a comprehensive agenda that the government laid out, which includes significant reform of our social services. And the reason for those significant reforms and what's required are pretty straightforward. After large increases in spending, in housing, in health and education, New Zealanders are not convinced that we have the outcomes that they hope for when they hand over their tax every week. In addition to that, we also have constrained fiscal circumstances looking ahead, regardless of whoever is in government. The reality is that in the government's books, because of the recession, are not in good order. We are going to have small growth in expenditure over the next 4 or 5 years, and that means that the government needs to rethink how it delivers frontline services, because it's critical that New Zealanders enjoy good frontline services despite the fact that the government's books aren't in very good order. And Mr Speaker, that's just one example of the reason why the government is focusing strongly on economic growth. If we want to have better public services, if we want to have new jobs created, if we want to have higher incomes, that can only happen if we have a sound economy where businesses have the confidence to invest and to employ people and make enough profits to pay tax. That's the raw facts of it. We can't do that in the same way as it was done in the last decade. A fair chunk of the growth in this economy in the last decade was the growth of government. In fact, the size of government expenditure grew at about twice the rate of the economy between 2003 and 2008. Because we have significant deficits, because we are having to go to world markets to borrow large amounts of money. I think in total we're borrowing about 240 million a week. Government doesn't have the opportunity to drive the growth of the economy over the next 10 years. It needs to come from the private sector, in particular from our export sector. And those are the terms the Prime Minister outlined in his speech yesterday, that the result of the boom times of the early 2000s, followed by the New Zealand recession, which began in late 2007 and early 2008, followed by the global recession, which turned up in October 2008, has left us with an economy that is out of balance. Essentially, we spend more than we earn. We got pretty good in the last 10 years at spending, both government and households. Households have ended up with significant debt. Government is now growing its debt quite rapidly. We owe the world $160 billion. The world has lent us $160 billion. We have to service that. That is going to continue to grow. So it's important that we now focus on the earning side of the economy. And the Prime Minister laid out a range of measures that are designed to boost the earning side of the economy. And among those were a number of sectoral measures that he outlined with respect to water storage, with respect to aquaculture, mining, and with respect to the tax system. There's going to be plenty of ongoing debate about what contribution changes in the tax system can make, but the motivation behind that is pretty straightforward. Tax is a pervasive incentive in the economy. Everyone makes decisions based on the taxes that they face. The tax working group pointed out a number of weaknesses in our tax system, with respect to people on higher incomes, it's inequitable because, for instance, a survey of the top 100 asset owners by IRD showed that only half of the wealthiest 100 people in New Zealand were actually paying the top tax rate. The opportunities for structuring to avoid taxes is too high, too great an opportunity, and that is eroding our tax base. I think there's another aspect of that too, and that's New Zealand's skill base. The fact is we have next door in Australia an economy that can compete for our skilled people and does so vigorously, and we need to create every advantage we can for ourselves. So the context in which the government is and the Prime Minister is considering tax changes, the need to create the right incentives in the economy so that we have the incentive to invest, to save and to export, because in the last 10 years we've had too much of consumption and borrowing. We've had too much of spending more than we earn. And our political opponents may regard that as sustainable. We don't. And the reason is not ideological. It's pretty straightforward. You can't keep doing it because people won't keep lending you money. But more importantly than that, it means that by the time we get through this cycle, we will be leaving for the next generation of workers about twice as much public debt as the government currently holds. And that is simply not good enough for the future generations of New Zealanders, because what it means is that we now are using their earning capacity now to meet our needs, which means they'll have less of that earning capacity to meet their own needs. I know the leader of the Greens no doubt will refer to sustainability, a word that can have many meanings. But one thing that is not sustainable is policy that leaves the bills for our consumption to the next generation. And Mr. Speaker, can I just finish my time by acknowledging the role that the Leader of the Greens has played in the last 13 years in this Parliament. I know the Greens will feel her loss, but I think Parliament will certainly feel her loss. I share with her the regret that she didn't have the opportunity to be a minister in previous governments, an opportunity that had her political allies offered it to her, she would have taken and would have been an excellent minister. And can I acknowledge from a political point of view, the expertise and professionalism and her ability to get her message across. There are very few politicians where there is total coherence about what they believe themselves, how they represent it and how they articulate it. And in my view, Jeanette Fitzsimons was one of the few in the time I've been here who represented